All right, welcome back, everyone. So the next couple of hours, we're going to have sort of plenary sessions in here. It'll be streamed live for colleagues that are dialing in on this event platform from around the world. What we're going to do is start off with a summary presentation or short presentation from Gopi about one of the workshops this morning, discussing the tourism sector and the interplay between the tourism sector and the humanitarian disaster response sectors. Then we're going to move into a panel discussion with some colleagues in the room to field questions about and reflections on the last couple of days of the conference and to talk about next steps. And then we will have a poetry reading. Not by me, so don't stress. Some closing remarks from Matt Tinkler here. Then I'll wrap up and then we'll have some remarks from Associate Professor Megan Kelly to open the networking event, and we'll have some drinks and nibbles. So, without further ado, Mr. Gopi, come on up.
ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട കളക്ടർ സാർ അറിയുവാൻ, ഞങ്ങളുടെ നാട്ടിലെയും എൻ്റെ വീട്ടിലെയും കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഓർമ്മിപ്പിക്കാനാണ് ഈ എഴുത്ത്. ഇപ്പോൾ കുറേ കൊല്ലമായിട്ട് ഉപ്പുവെള്ളമാണ് ഞങ്ങളുടെയൊക്കെ വീടിൻ്റെ ചുറ്റിലും. വീടൊക്കെ കേടായി. എൻ്റെ കൂട്ടുകാർ ആദിത്യൻ്റെയും അതുലിൻ്റെയും പിന്നെ ആര്യയുടെയും വീട്ടിൽ 2011 ഓരുവെള്ളം കയറാൻ തുടങ്ങിയതാ. 13 കൊല്ലമായിട്ട് അവർ ഇങ്ങനെ ജീവിക്കണേ. 15 മിനിറ്റ് വെള്ളത്തിൽ കൂടി നടന്നിട്ടാ സ്കൂളിൽ പോണേ. കാലാവസ്ഥ മാറ്റാന്നാ പറയണേ. കുറെ വീടും പോയി, ആൾക്കാർക്ക് ജോലിയും പോയി. നാരായണൻ ചേട്ടനൊക്കെ എത്ര മീൻ കിട്ടിയിരുന്നതാ, ഇപ്പൊ ഒന്നുമില്ല, തൂമ്പുപണി മാത്രമായി. ഇവിടുത്തെ മെമ്പറൊക്കെ പലതും ശ്രമിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്, പക്ഷെ ഒറ്റയ്ക്ക് എന്താവാനാ. ഞങ്ങളുടെ വാർഡിൽ കഴിഞ്ഞ 4 വർഷം ഏതു ദിവസം എത്ര മഴ പെയ്തു എന്ന് കൃത്യം ഡാറ്റ കയ്യിലുള്ള കുട്ടിയുണ്ട്. ഇങ്ങനെ നോക്കുമ്പോൾ മഴയുടെ പാറ്റേൺ മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ പറ്റും. നമ്മുടെ പ്രശ്നത്തിൻ്റെ കൃത്യം വിവരങ്ങളുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ പരിഹാരം ഉണ്ടാക്കാൻ പറ്റില്ലേ? ഇത് മുരുകേശൻ ചേട്ടൻ ലക്ഷക്കണക്കിന് കണ്ടൽ നട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. ആൾക്കിത് ചെയ്തിട്ട് എന്താ ലാഭം? ആള് ചെയ്യുന്നതിന്റെ ഗുണം ഞങ്ങൾ കുട്ടികൾക്കാണ്. കാലാവസ്ഥാ വ്യതിയാനത്തെ അതിജീവിക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്ന കേരളത്തിന്റെ സ്വന്തം അരിയാണ് പൊക്കാളി. അത് ഇവിടെ കൃഷി ചെയ്യാൻ ആളില്ല. എന്നാൽ വിച്ചപ്പൻ ചേട്ടൻ 12 ഏക്കറിൽ എല്ലാ കൊല്ലവും പൊക്കാളി വിളവെടുക്കും. ഇങ്ങനത്തെ വലിയ കാര്യങ്ങൾ ചെയ്യുന്ന ആളുകളെ നമ്മൾ വഴികാട്ടികളാക്കേണ്ടേ. സസ്നേഹം, ദേവനന്ദൻ.
This is not something that you wouldn't find in the tourism brochures from Kerala. And in the past 10 years at least, this is the life that, as a travel and tourism professional, this is the life that I've been seeing it. When we decided to shoot lives of these people, the whole discussion within the team was about how are we going to shoot and present these images, which is happening, their lives are happening in stunning location. But at the same time, how do you present their struggles with dignity? So somehow we did whatever we could do. And these families, they don't live in some faraway land. They just live around the corner for us. And interestingly, some of the most popular tourist destinations in my state, it just there, like 1 minute, 2 minutes away from these places, So as a tour operator, as a travel and tourism professional, why are we engaging with the local communities? Now, for me, that's the thing about tourism industry. There's hardly a place where we are not there. We are there in some of the most stunning places, beautiful places of the world, but at the same time, equally vulnerable places of the world. If you look at everything that is happening in the past few decades in the backdrop of climate change, it's affecting destinations, it's affecting communities. Equally, it affects the tourism industry. The challenge is, how do we ensure that there is dignity for these communities? How do we ensure that these people have a livelihood with dignity, again, in the backdrop of climate change? What is it that we can do? When you saw in these images in the video that the sea water is literally entering people's houses, in some places from 2011. And like while we were shooting this, I know these people like for several years now, but one thing that I had not noticed was that the woman in the house that is surrounded by water, she kind of jokingly told me, we don't buy salt. When we make some curry, if we need salt, we just take it from the wall. And that's not a joke. You can literally peel off salt. Now imagine this happening to our children if they have to walk 15 minutes every day through water like that. So I believe, like, I come from a very highly privileged space because this is not how I live. I see this, I witness this, but my life is not like this. Now, when the sea water is entering people's houses, it is not going to take much longer before the sea water to enter the tourism spaces, the stunning backwater resorts, the hotels, beautiful properties all around. You don't need a traveler to be pissed off for 2 meters of water to enter the property. All you need is just 1 inch of water entering your reception or your bedroom. All the $300 per night that you pay will be questioned on the TripAdvisor the next day. So that is where the tourism industry is in a very interesting space, because if there is no destination, because if the communities are constantly vulnerable, if they are frequently affected by disasters, whether it's slow disasters like what we just saw, the tidal flooding, which interestingly is not declared as a disaster in my state, or a massive flood or a heavy rain. Now, once this starts affecting the tourism industry also, there comes the question of ROI. When you invest millions of dollars into destination development, when you invest millions of dollars into developing properties or travel experiences, if you can't travel, or if you are constantly vulnerable, if you are always worried, is a flood going to happen? Like it happens in my business all the time. Earlier, we used to do business during the so-called off-season, which is the monsoon time. Many other tour operators don't do business around that time, but I celebrate monsoon. So we invite travelers from around the world to enjoy the monsoon. But 2018, the flood that happened in Kerala, it changed the dynamics completely, that we do not have a single booking. Like we used to handle groups, photography tours from UK, from different parts of the world, Nat Geo. Not a single person comes now. They ask us, can you guarantee that there won't be a flood? How can I guarantee that there is no? So this is a challenge that the tourism industry is facing. So now what you saw earlier was a very slow onset of disaster. Now let me just show you a small 2-3 minutes video about a sudden onset of disaster that we experienced.
In August 2018, we experienced a once-in-100 years deluge. For a few days it was fun. By mid-August, incessant rain forced rivers to breach and mudslides from the mountains. Then came the flood. In Chendamangalam, the weaving community of more than 300 families saw their livelihoods washed away. Looms, properties, stock drowned under the water up to 12 feet deep. Piles of stinking soil clothes lay strewn behind the weaving units and along the village road. Where most saw devastation, social entrepreneurs Lakshmi and Gopi saw opportunities. This is where the story of Chekutis began. Through crowdsourcing, 50,000 volunteers in 9 countries upcycled the ruined clothes into 120,000 plus Chekutis. 360 dolls out of each worthless sari. Selling the Chekutis raised the much-needed funds for the weavers. They also captured the mood of the time. A beacon of resilience and solidarity shown by our people during the flood. This child from the village of Chendamangalam was someone we all could relate to. It had scars. It had stains. It didn't pretend another perfect world at all. It was us. They are used as gifts, decorations, luggage tags and lanyards, as workshop tool for children affected by trauma, as a memory to hold on to, as a reminder of the height we reached as a humanity. The Chekutis are still young, but they are growing, sharing new stories of supporting the underprivileged with dignity, and telling the world that Kerala isn't just only God's own country. It's also a land of Chekutis. Because this isn't just a story of one village, it's the beginning of 35 million stories, all from one place. A place called Kerala.
So irrespective of the 450 precious lives that we lost and about $5 billion that we lost, I still think there's some positive story that we can pick up from this, in the sense of how the local people came together as volunteers instead of waiting for NGOs or INGOs or any international agencies or UN to come and figure out a solution. Because there, the need of the time was to ensure that we bring in livelihood with dignity, not tomorrow, but now. And this particular initiative, it did not even take 24 hours for the money to start coming in. It took less than half a day for the website to be up. It took, someone else, one of my friends I did the first sketch. Someone else completed the logo. Someone else, another friend came in and set up the payment gateway. And one thing we made sure was that we did not want to link it with our on personal websites or our private limited company website. Because accountability, transparency, everything becomes such a challenge when large amount of money starts coming in, especially when emotions are involved. Because the travelers, they feel so connected to a destination. And that's where we started investing. We started reaching out to our travelers and travel companies from around the world, telling about what is happening in the ground. And we started telling stories, small, short videos we started sharing with them. But it was not about the misery. It was not about the struggle, but it was about the positive story. And the travelers became ambassadors. And within few weeks, we raised about $120,000. All the money went directly to the Weavers Cooperative Society. The donors could see it. So we just kept a small 25 Indian rupees, which is affordable for anybody and everybody. But we said that's the minimum. You're welcome to pay as much as you want. So we had, I was telling this morning in a workshop that we had some restaurant owners in Brighton in UK who said, we'll give you 8,000 British pounds for $1. And then they said, we'll give you back that doll, which means you can sell it again. So that $1 became 16,000 British pounds. So for me, this was a story of resilience of a community. At the same time, it kind of inspired us in the sense of, like, I worked in NGO sector, I worked in private sector, and my background is disaster management. But one thing that I saw or ensured that had to happen there was that we didn't want process to slow down the work that had to be done. We didn't want to wait for some NGOs to write a report and send it to Delhi, and then it comes to France or UK or US. And by the time the money comes in, if at all it comes in, the next flood should not come there. So we wanted to make sure that the money with dignity has to go, and it cannot be given as a charity. We didn't want to give it as a donation. So this was made out of the dolls, which was created by the skill set of the people. So initially it was all voluntary driven. It was all volunteers who did it. But now what we did is we didn't want the initiative to die down. So what we did was to create a social enterprise. Now, not with the clothes from the flood, but the cloth that's been lying in a stock for past 10 years, 20 years, which they never managed to sell. We started making dolls again. So there are enough and more buyers. The problem is that we don't have enough weavers who can make this. They are all getting old. So now I just want to take you through some connections in the sense of when I first talked about the doll, like in my place, in my state, they could relate to it because it had all the scars on it. It had all the stains on it. It could relate. They could relate with their own lives. It worked very well. But then what was surprising for me was that somebody from Kenya or somebody from here in Australia or somebody who went through an earthquake or cyclone or fire, they could all relate to this little doll, So that kind of gave us a soft power to us. But now, the main reason why we managed to raise funds was the tourism industry. Because the travelers, they kept on telling the stories. Some of the travelers were already there during the flood. When they went back, actually the HP headquarters in Sydney, they collected saris from the villages. They brought it back here to Sydney and they made little dolls. And then they raised funds and they sent it back to us. So there were a lot of participation in that. But now, if you look at the tourism industry, what is so interesting is that irrespective of the fact that the tourism industry is probably providing jobs to 1 out of 10 adults around the world, it is also contributing to about 10 to 12% GDP around the world. It is equally responsible for 14 to 15% of greenhouse gas emission, which is creating the climate change. So how do we address, how do we give back to the destination? How do we build resilience? This is the question we were asking. Now, when I look at the humanitarian sector, my friend Lars Peters from ACAPS, he constantly jokingly say that, do you know the size of the humanitarian sector? And he would say, it's just as small as the chewing gum industry. It's just $30 billion. Now look at the tourism industry. It's a $9 trillion industry, which is spread all around the world in hyper-local level. So when a disaster happens, these guys are there on site. Now, whatever is needed by the humanitarian sector during a crisis, whether it is transport, whether it is access to supply chain, logistics, you take shelter, accommodation, you take food and beverage. Because food and beverage, you need to provide food to communities affected by disasters with dignity. And highly skilled human resources. And the ability to raise funds in such short time. This is all sitting idle with one sector. That is this $9 trillion tourism industry. Why are you guys not working together? And as a small travel company, we've been doing this. And then we've been wondering, why we can't confine this work that we are doing as some small island of excellence somewhere in some corner of India. And then we started researching. We started looking for who else is doing this kind of work. And then I found this. Very interesting bunch of people. Starting with Airbnb. Airbnb has a program called Airbnb Homes, where just in 2022, obviously because of Ukraine crisis, they managed to provide jobs provide rooms for 140,000 people. And this initiative was started in 2012. And then TripAdvisor. They also have similar initiatives, which continues. They started with $5 million in 2016. In 2020, the contribution was 10 million, and most of it actually went into an initiative called the World Central Kitchen for assisting chefs to travel around the world to cook for the communities. Again, food with dignity. So back to World Central Kitchen. Started with Haiti earthquake. Jose and his team he started with his wife. You might probably know about him. And now they are targeting $1 billion to be raised through the initiative. Now, Intrepid Travel is a company based here in Melbourne. Even a couple of weeks ago, when the unfortunate Syrian-Turkish earthquake happened, they came out with an appeal asking their travelers to contribute. They said they will contribute starting with 100,000, and the Intrepid has a foundation. They came up with 50, and they also said they will match every single dollar all the way up to 100,000. So there are a lot of initiatives like this happening around the world, but unfortunately, there's no study. I have no idea how much money has been contributed by the tourism industry. Intrepid, for example, contributed to Australian Red Cross. Many others contribute directly to hyper-local level organization within destinations, within places that are affected. But there are no numbers. I don't think anybody has really studied about it. And then there are also very interesting initiatives like this is something that I was part of. It was done by a small district administration in the state of Kerala, where the Hotel and Restaurant Association of India, they partnered with the local district administration where they subsidized the cost of more than 100 plus restaurants in the city of Calicut, where they provided food to anybody who was hungry. You could walk into a restaurant with a coupon in your hand. Nobody would know. Again, coming back to the point of dignity. If 10 people are eating there, if there are 2 people with a coupon, nobody would know. You don't need to stand in a queue to collect your food. Nobody need to know that you don't have money. And you don't need to necessarily be poor to get the coupon. You could be a student who lost your wallet, or you could be somebody who just forgot your lunchbox. Anybody could walk in, So this went on for about 2-3 years. Then the new administration came in and it died. So another interesting stuff that I found was in places like Hawaii, in Mexico, where the tourism is heavily dependent on the health of coral reefs. Because of climate change, because of the temperature change in the water, many coral reefs are dying, affecting $2 to $8 billion worth tourism industry business. So Nature Conservancy, they came up with a proposal that they will provide insurance program so that whenever a disaster happens and the coral reefs are badly affected, the local partners can claim up to $2 million to start repairing the coral reefs. So many initiatives like this. So insurance sector has a huge play in this marriage that we are trying to do between the tourism sector and the humanitarian sector. Now, as I was talking to you about the possibility of repurposing the tourism tools to work effectively with the humanitarian sector, we've been working on it for a while. But very small company working in very small places, and we thought it's important that we start talking to large players in the world. So at ITB Berlin, which is the world's largest travel show, in March 2023, we announced that we are creating a platform called Kaita. Kaita is the Malayalam word, like the language that we speak in the state of Kerala. Malayalam word for the plant, screw pine. Screw pine that is adaptable, flexible, very resilient. It can grow in drought. It can, it's a very powerful tool for water harvesting, etc. That's why we chose that name. So this Kaita is a platform where we are trying to bring the tourism sector and the humanitarian sector together. Now, what shape it's going to take, I do not know. So this is the first place where we brought together some tourism players and the humanitarian sector to have a dialogue, because the humanitarian sector has no idea about what is happening within the tourism sector. Nobody has done a SWOT analysis. Tourism sector has no idea that the humanitarian sector has amazing skill sets which can be used to train us. We already have the resources and tools with us. So why can't Center for Humanitarian Leadership or Fordham in New York can train us, people in the travel industry, with the resources and tools we have about humanitarian values, even first responder training. Imagine if 1,000 taxi drivers who are working in the tourism sector in Melbourne can be trained to be first responders. Last August, when there was a landslide in my state, I got a call from one of my colleagues telling, Gopi, did you know? I said, yes, I'm already aware of it. And he asked me, how do you know? And the local police called us, said, you guys are aware of this landslide? Yes, we are aware of it, because our drivers are constantly, we have a WhatsApp group for our drivers who constantly update what's happening in the ground. So imagine these guys having the skills to get into first response. Now, I was kind of jokingly talking about the chewing gum industry size of the humanitarian sector. With more and more disasters happening, climate change is not going to disappear. With more and more disasters happening around the world, how is this sector going to handle all the crises? And I understand from a lot of my friends in the academic that close to 80% of the humanitarian budget is spent on man-made disasters. So you are playing with 20%. So you need to have partnerships, and please talk to the tourism industry. Yeah, that's what I have to say. Now, since, that's my email ID and phone number. Now, since I'm a tour operator who is standing here addressing the humanitarian leaders here, I would expect that you might want to see at least one product from the blue Yonder. So I'll show you a 30 seconds video. this is a twilight dinner on a Chinese fishing net. Now, the reason why I shared this with you is this is how we design products and experiences. This came because in the earlier morning workshop, somebody asked me, how do you figure out, how do you work with the communities? Because when we interact with the communities, we are aware of the challenges they face. So because of global warming, because of the climate change challenges, the fishermen in my place, the catch has gone down tremendously to the extent that sometimes even after 8 days of fishing, they hardly get anything. So they need supplementary source of income. So many parts of the world, we are talking about climate resilience, and back home, there are certain places where we have already started talking about climate adaptability. How the hell are we going to live with this? How do we ensure that the climate crisis is transformed into climate, sort of a livelihood opportunity for people? So we are bringing in products like this so that it brings in supplementary sources of income for people. Again, no charity. Use their skill set, use the facilities they have, bring in the dignity. So this is how we are trying to repurpose whatever we have. In the similar way, my appeal to both the tourism industry and the humanitarian sector would be that there is a tremendous scope and possibility for us to come together, not just to do any charity or CSR or philanthropy, but for our own survival. The tourism industry need strong handholding with the humanitarian sector to survive in the past, because if I do not have an early warning forecasting system, I will not be able to evacuate my travelers on time. So it's about business. It's about saving lives. And the humanitarian sector, with lack of resources, by spreading far too thin already, there's a tremendous scope for marriage with the tourism industry. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gopi. We're just going to have a short interlude, so think about some lift music in your head. Just while we set the panel up. Can you invite the panelists up, please?
All right. Ooh. All right. So I have the honor of introducing some speakers and people who have been around the conference the last few days to kind of bring together this final or penultimate, actually, little reflection session. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Nazanin Zadeh-Cummings, and I'm the Associate Director of Research at the Center for Humanitarian Leadership and a Senior Lecturer in Humanitarian Studies at Deakin University. And I'm wondering, is Nick Brown here? He's not here. So he yesterday was speaking about, in his presentation on education and humanitarian engineering, the importance of reflection. And if any of you have ever, oh, there he is, Nick. Hi. He's like, why did everyone turn around and just look at me? I was just saying that you spoke yesterday in your presentation about the importance of reflection in humanitarian engineering education. And if any of you have ever taken a humanitarian course at Deakin, you know we also really bring in reflection. And I want this panel to be a little bit of time for us to just pause and reflect on some of the key takeaways and messages that we've heard over the last 3 days. So the 2 days that we spent virtually, and then this hybrid day. I know reflection is not a process that happens instantaneously, right? We're probably all still simmering a little, need some time for the sauce to thicken. So this might be kind of early thoughts and early reflections, but I do hope it sets a tone for you as you go off into your weekend and have the thoughts that have sprung up over the course of this conference kind of swirling in your brain, to do take that time to pause and reflect, to consider what actions come out of these sessions for you. What does this mean for you, your work? For some of you, it may mean WhatsApping Gopi and saying, A, how do I get on one of these Chinese fishing net dinners? But B, how do we work together, right? So with that, kind of to set the tone of the next about 30 minutes, I'm really honored to be joined today by Adelina Kamal, who you may recognize from yesterday's keynote speech, where she further developed the idea of humanitarian resistance and the ecosystem versus the ecosystem. I also have the pleasure of being joined by Thomas Lay from Save the Children and Saoirse O'Callaghan from HPG. So I'm going to pose the same question to all three of you, which is, what are your key reflections that you would like to share with the audience based off of the last few days that we've had? I'm going to hand to you, Saoirse, because you're the closest to me.
I guess, well, the first thing just to say is just I know how much effort it takes to pull this together. So I think it's been quite an extraordinary feat to do, not just in person, but online over 3 days. And just huge congratulations to everyone involved, because it's a massive feat. And for me personally, I don't have the privilege of working in the Asia Pacific region. I work in London, tend to work on many global issues, probably with a European and East African focus. And so for me personally, it's been so enriching just to hear so much about this region. And I guess to meet so many people that I wouldn't normally get to meet. So that for me personally has been fantastic. In terms of some of the themes that I would take away from the actual conference itself, I guess the big one for me is around, well, I guess there's a few, but the predominant one has been, I think, about local leadership. And I think that's been a strain that's been throughout the conference, but in a way that feels a lot more real, perhaps, than is discussed at a global level or in other contexts. I think certainly the Asia Pacific has models and experiences that I think have been tried and tested, that are more embedded, that are more genuine, that feel a little bit more authentic. And I think there's a lot to draw from this region and from this conference in relation to that, that I don't think we hear enough about at a global level. So I think that's been very helpful for me. The other thing that I've really liked about this conference is that there feels like there's a good mix between provocation and challenge, but also it being grounded in practice. That while I think Adelina and Themrise have challenged us to think differently about the system and encouraged us to not accept the status quo, and to think about power, to think about alternative models of action. Sometimes those conversations can be a little bit abstract. I'm not saying, Adelina, that your conversation is abstract, but I think sometimes we can get lost a little bit in the humanitarian policy discussions around what ifs. And what I've liked here is that there's been a good mix of that kind of political challenge that has come from some of the speakers, but also it being rooted in practice. So, one of the panels that I was in today was, what could have been quite an abstract conversation about research and analysis and power, but there were lots of examples, and we had last night a discussion on accountability, again, lots of practical examples. And so I've personally really enjoyed that. I think I'll stop there. There's more I can add, but I'll stop there for now and hand to you.
Thank you. I've written down very similar things: power, control, things like that. So I'd echo everything you've just said. And I also echo the congratulations for pulling this together. It is no mean feat, right? And there's an energy around this. There's an energy today because we're all in person, but I think that energy has been carried through the last few days in a virtual setting as well. And that's quite unique to be able to pull that together. So congratulations to all the organisers on that one. Power, control, letting go. And I think for me, there's been a lot of conversations have been held in the sort of structural sense, right? And looking at how the machinery does work, doesn't work, what alternative models could look like, etc. But there's an undertone to a lot of that. And there's a bravery that everyone's demonstrating here about the individual nature of that and what it means as us as individuals as we're trying to embrace this. And we're talking about big change. And I think the topic of the conversation has got a demonstration that CHL and the organisers have got finger on the pulse. The moment's ripe for this conversation. There's been a sort of few people over the last few years who have been mentioning, we've got to change, we've got to reform, the sector's broken. But now there's enough people, I think there's a critical mass emerging within the industry that recognises things like the multilateral coordination structures have maybe run their course. And so now there's a desire to see, well, what next? And for me, there's a stuckness to the conversation that I think we've kind of challenged this week around. We've got one model and we're agreeing that that's maybe not what we need anymore. And all the conversations outside this workshop have been, well, what's the replacement? What's the alternative to that, right? Looking for a like for like. And that's the more extreme conversation. The sort of more moderate discussion has been, well, what do we have to tweak, right? And it just smacks of moving the deck chairs on a Titanic, right? If you're just looking at tweaking the edges of that. Whereas I think this week, you mentioned provocation. I think you're right. There's been a lot of provocation around, well, is it a new system, or is it, and this is my sort of personal take on it, that we're not looking for a replication of something, but just in a modern era. We're looking at a complete remodeling. And what's coming through quite clearly in all of the very tangible examples for me is that what's working in one location, the ecosystem that the humanitarian needs exist in now, is so diverse in all the different contexts. A cookie cutter approach is probably not fit for purpose. And so it's less about what is the new globally aggregated model that we can replicate elsewhere. It's more a case of, well, great, how do we support and work with that that's functioning in that location? And not worry about trying to build it and replicate and transplant it somewhere else. Just embrace what's happening in that location as also working quite well. And so it's working within a unique ecosystem. And it's sort of beholden on the international actors to recognize the needs to accommodate our own approaches and move into the space rather than expect everyone else to accommodate our approaches a little bit more. And I think the conversations here have been really helpful in just moving that agenda forward, helping to just bring another level of dialogue and debate and rigorous discussion, I think, into that space. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you for that. I think it's not only the conversation, though. The process for me started when Joss called me, when Joss emailed me and inviting me to become a speaker, a keynote speaker for this conference. So first of all, well done for organizing the conference, but also well done for coming up with that background paper that suggests the 4M. It's quite difficult, a theme for me, because if you look at the background paper again, in each of the 4Ms, there are so many questions there, right? So it took me quite some time, actually. I went through the process of answering all those questions within each of the 4M. And then, to tell you the truth, Joss, I came up with different versions of my paper. So I told my husband, okay, I came up with this first version. No, I don't think that's the thing that I want to say during the conference. And then second version, third version. I think what you heard yesterday was my fourth iteration. And that because the 4M itself is challenging. And I'm quite actually happy with questions. I work well with questions. So you started with good questions. So it's not only about the organization, but the way you structure the theme, the 4Ms, and challenge us through the question. And also for me, myself, to question whether I'm going to talk about this and that. So many actually things that I want to say during this conference. So I appreciate the opportunity for me to speak, because then because it provided me with an opportunity to reflect, right? And those questions provided me with the platform to reflect. So thanks for that. Second, I think I have spoken quite a bit yesterday about the ecosystem. So I'm not going to repeat on that. But when Joss contacted me, I wondered whether I should come here or not, right? Sometimes I feel guilty being a humanitarian. And then there's this post by a friend of mine, Paula, questioning about the Humanitarian Partnership Week in Geneva and how the humanitarians actually are flying there, right? So should I do the same by going here? It's only 6 hours away, so it's I feel less guilty, right, going to Melbourne than going to Geneva. But I still feel guilty sometimes, talking about, even yesterday when I talk about the local humanitarians in Myanmar, I still feel guilty. I mean, I'm speaking as if I'm speaking on their behalf, and they're going through, those brutal airstrikes, helping the local actors, and I'm here having the privilege sitting in this very nice conference room, right, speaking on their behalf. But then I wonder whether I should be doing here, or I think we should still be doing conversation like this, but it is also up to us how to bring it further, right? And it is not for me to say that you should be doing this. I think you know what to do. And at the end of the day, the key takeaways for me, how much I gathered from your thoughts, your reflection, your conversation, your challenges, how much I could bring those conversations with me, to help those who actually do the real work on the ground. So I'm not going to basically lecture you on what to do after this. It's upon us, every one of us, to bring back to whoever that actually should have been here in the first place.
Thank you all. Those reflections to me both highlight the big issues of power that we've spoken about, but also this idea of privilege. And I think actually, to echo Gopi, you mentioned privilege in your own talk, right? That to be in this room is a privilege, to be having the space to have these conversations. And so, Adelina, I really appreciate your calling out of this question of, well, who's in the room and who's not, and then what do we do with the gift that we have of the thoughts from the last 3 days, and the thoughts we have from the others that we work with and that we interact with in our work. I also want to pick up on this phrase that you used, Thomas, of ripeness, right? That this is ripe for this time. Because I think this is I think at any moment we can say, wow, what a unique time we're living in, right? Because every time is a bit unique. But, I also thinking about emissions, this question of climate change. We know we can work virtually now. We've done it before. We had our last conference completely online, and I think that showed us we can do it. But there's also something really special about having conversations, having the chat, right? And so we're in this era where we kind of know better than to just fly willy-nilly, but we also know that human connection is really important. We know that pandemics can happen, right? We know that things can happen that really changes the way we live very, very quickly. And for many of us, that was very well known even before the pandemic. We know, you brought up kind of regional ideas, right? Like where you're working, what regions you're looking at. We see different trends in different regions around the world. We see, we're talking a lot about local, national, but I think also bringing in the regional as well, in between the national and the international. So I think, the backdrop against, kind of putting all of those things together and coming back to the theme of the conference of re-engineering the disaster response system. I really appreciate that comment. This is the time to be talking about that. And I want to reflect, that question I asked I asked you to take a few steps back. And my next question that I also like to open to the audience is to take a few steps forward. We hold this conference every 2 years. So this year the theme, this year the theme again was re-engineering the disaster response system. I would say actually maybe these are conversations way overdue. 2 years ago, we asked the question, who are the humanitarians? So we're looking at who's even considers themselves part of the system. And I think some of the dialogue that we've had over the past few days shows us that's still a very, very salient question. So my provocation now and my question to our panelists and to those in the room is, in 2 years, what do you want to be talking about? Where do we hope we've moved to in 2 years that we'll be having a different conversation? What do you hope that will be the big question that we'll be trying to face in the next 2 years? And I don't say that to have you plan our next conference for us and not do our work. I don't necessarily mean literally at this conference, but in 2 years' time, what do you hope we have progressed enough in that we have a new question? What is going to be the big issue facing the sector? I see a hand from the audience. I'm going a bit rogue here, just a panel discussion, but I'm bringing in the audience. And then I'll come back to you guys.
Joseph Johanna, I was speaker at the day one Sri Lanka Network. I think one of the challenges is we are speaking to the friends around the friends. So the sector is speaking to the sector itself. We really need to go to the next building where they are talking about corporate and private sector and bring them part of our business, because I think the humanitarian business is shrinking year after year and the crises are increasing. And one side of the river is working, the other side, they're listening to the news and there's not much happening. I'm expecting there will be critical needs to bring the private sector and corporates to be part of solution toward, decreasing the effectiveness that has been happening across the world day after day. So I hope we can see that.
Fabulous. Thank you. Any other thoughts from the audience?
Thank you. This year will be the medium-term review of the Sendai framework. Sendai framework is largely a blueprint of the disaster reduction globally. This is where a lot of our stakes are attached to. So I feel that the next conversation would probably be useful to leverage that midterm review and see how far we travel, because that global platform, framework has accountability explicitly stated, unlike World Humanitarian Summit. So I would like to draw that connection and make it a meaningful conversation. Thank you.
Maybe then I'll turn to our panelists for their thoughts. Any takers to go first?
For me, you mentioned ecosystems, right? I've been talking about ecosystems all week, right? And I think for me, I'm not going to give you a title for 2 years' time. You can wordsmith and get that fine-tuned yourselves. But for me, it's this notion of leadership mentalities within the industry and how we shift those. And you mentioned the sort of precarity that we're living in at the minute, right? The pandemic piece and the videos of the flooding and the climate change effects that are very real now, right? This is not a hypothetical thing in the future. This is very real. And the AI piece and the technological revolutions that continue to sort of accelerate are meaning we're living in a world of precarity, right? And that's dictating and demanding interdependency with many different people. And I completely agree with you, right? We are an echo chamber. We're an echo chamber within an echo chamber in this room now. So for me, the next one is moving away from kind of an industry that's dictated and dominated by Messiah-type leaders with a top-down approach to how are we swimming within ecosystems, and what is that new ecosystem that's bigger than just the kind of top-down and multilateral aid mechanism that's dominated by ODA, which isn't going to be it'll be interesting, won't it? In 2 years' time, what percentage of humanitarian financing is ODA versus other sources? Don't know.
I have a couple of ideas, which I think will be hard to pull off. So it's kind of nice to be able to hand the gauntlet out to someone and let them grapple with it. But I think a conversation that we don't have enough, and people we don't hear enough from, are around kind of national systems and the role of national governments in particular. I don't hear enough from national disaster management groups and committees and state-based action, and how national governments kind of interact with our system, but also establish their own systems. So I would love something that is much more rooted in government and government systems, and starts there and kind of thinks about how they interact both with kind of aid actors, but also communities, but also thinking about their engagement with other peer governments, and so kind of regional engagement. So that's one thing I'd love to know more about and hear more about. Kind of on a slightly similar vein, I would love to learn more about and hear more about disaster management in high-income environments, and some of the challenges related to that. I think there are many similarities, and I think we think about that very little. So issues around marginalization, around exclusion, about vulnerability, and how the politics around disasters and high income environments and how they mirror a lot of what we're talking about. But also some of the kind of dysfunctions around crises in high income countries, around kind of like we were talking yesterday about, why are there food banks in many high income environments, and what we can learn, I think, from international response. So that would be another theme that I would love to attend. And I would also love, and maybe this is just because I spent a lot of time talking about kind of power and dysfunction, and I would love a conference that talked about things that went well and what we could learn from it. I don't know whether we would actually be able to pull off 3 days of a conference on that. It might be a very short conference, but I think it would be quite maybe quite enlightening and inspiring, and probably would involve a different set of actors. But I think it would be great to attend that conference.
I had a quite interesting conversation with some of your students during lunch. I think they're still here. So one of them told me about, we were talking, of course, about the Myanmar crisis. And then she told me, "Are you still here?" Yes, you are. So you told me about the game, right? How the game, it was actually invented by Myanmar people. How the game actually generated income from people at the grassroots level to raise money for the so-called aid workers on the ground. So I think we need to learn more about this innovative grassroots models, right? That raise money or channel the humanitarian assistance in a way that we have never imagined, because it's happening. So I would love to hear more about it. The game, please send me that. But there are so many other examples. In one of the sessions when we talk about standards before, I think the presenter, Philip, where are you, Philip? You're still here?
At the airport.
Oh, at the airport. Okay. So he said about us, the humanitarian sector, being a conservative sector. I think the challenge for us would be to make ourselves creative. And I think we have been conservative because we have been talking among ourselves. So that would be one of the things that I would like to learn 2 years from now, and we probably can start gathering this kind of good cases, good case study. Sorry, this is not the 3 hours difference only. So I'm not jet lag, so I can use that as an excuse. So good case studies, the game, and whatever innovations that we have, and then really learn from that how we can make ourselves more creative. Tourism is one of them, right? So in your session today, I was struck because the conservative industry was not in our conversation. So perhaps we just get stuck by labeling ourselves, no? And perhaps we just have to be creative with it. So how to make our conservative sector to become more creative? Because otherwise then Elon Musk will actually, challenge us and perhaps buy the entire humanitarian sector. If he could buy Twitter, then he probably could buy the humanitarian sector. How much are we?
He's welcome to buy it. He can fund it, can't he?
3 billion, right? Lars said billion?
30 billion.
30 billion, right? It's nothing for Elon Musk. Anyway, so I will leave it at that.
Fabulous. Thank you. So I think I'm seeing first we'll just put all those ideas into ChatGPT and that will give us our next conference. So thank you, everyone. The Elon Musk biannual humanitarian leadership and Starship-a-thon that you're all invited to. No, but I think what's been really powerful for me about that was hearing, I see threads of all of these things already in the conversations we're having, but they're not, they're the seedlings, right? And so really cultivating that and bringing out some of those emerging themes and really developing them further for the next few years. I think that really gives some fabulous direction. Adelina, you really set us up, I think, for what's about to happen next, because you spoke about the importance of creativity. I'm not going to ask you to be creative. I saw your eyes like, about the importance of creativity. So I'm going to thank our panelists and ask them to join me in thanking them.
Thank you, and thanks, Naz, for chairing. TV, where's TV? TV! Tivi's been kind enough to come to the conference, to have been across so many of the sessions and some of the insights and the experiences that we've heard through the last 3 days. And is going to share with us something incredible. So thank you, Jeevi. Welcome. And whoops, and try not to trip over chairs.
I present you a we poem. As I weave my world and yours, bind my experience with yours, word by word, that I heard and you spoke in the last couple of days. Within a shared creative space, you and I becoming we poetically. You and I becoming we poetically, not politically though. We are the reflections of the land we come from, the land we live and work, the oceans we cross, the people we meet, the crises we survived, the atrocities we faced, the scars we hide and the memories we weighed. We are meeting today on this land of Wurundjeri people, the traditional custodians of a land that is bruised, not healed. From the father of all disasters, we call it colonization. We are gathered here today with a burning passion to re-engineer the ivory tower, the empire of giants, where global is the north, local is a myth. Most of us lost somewhere in between global south and global north. A system of egos and ghosts muddied with bureaucratic rules, built on the colonial legacy, guilt with hoarding resource, hiding behind unearned privileges, paralyzing the grassroots revolutions. This system is obsolete, we say, nonetheless very much alive. Power is in the hands of a few, decisions made behind closed doors. Racism creeping under the carpets, sexism lurking in the corners, superiority complex, cloaked in diplomacy, bathed in the glory of modern civilization. The walls of the ivory tower, displaying the universal concepts, principles, and mandates, meaning lost in translations. Between buzzwords, decolonization and localization, going rogue, telling the same thing differently, repeatedly. Tomato, tomato, decolonization, localization. The mismatch between the rhetoric and actions, theories dismissing the relevance of practices. The ivory tower, standing tall and tough. The empire of giants. It is obsolete, we say, nonetheless very much alive. Too hard to dismantle, too slow to change. So changes from within sounds like a fairy tale to tell. So changes from within sounds like a fairy tale to tell. Yet, here we are, passionate individuals, visionary leaders, representing entities, communities, and aspirations. Diverse, but united, with a commitment to change the global crisis responses. With a commitment to change the global crisis responses. The system is like a fist. It is closed with fear to change, rigid and inflexible. It is stuck with functioning inertia, tied with egos and ghosts. It is packed with power, too heavy for a few to hold. Too heavy for a few to hold. How long can we keep it closed? Resist hope and from becoming woke. Let go. Open it slowly. Let go of power, egos, and ghosts. Look at it. A flower of hope, feeling light and inviting, prepared to be an ally in responding to crisis. Look at it, a flower of hope, feeling light and inviting, prepared to be an ally in responding to crisis, to hold hand in the march to justice, to raise hand against atrocities, to embrace and cherish trust and friendship. No master, no savior, no oligarchy, no patriarchy. Everyone is local somewhere, international elsewhere. Everyone has agency not to deprive them in emergencies. End the tyranny of experts and center the communities affected. End the tyranny of experts and center communities affected. Look at what matters in the context and relevance where global is not the north, international is not the norm, and the local is not all the same. Moving away from a centralized system, let's make space for humanitarian isms. Hold in harmony those pluralistic visions, different mandates, and emerging actors. Hold in harmony those pluralistic visions, different mandates, and emerging actors. Shifting from an ecosystem to an ecosystem, equipped with anticipatory actions than reactionary responses. In strengthening humanitarian resistance, nurture the social capital to leverage for self-determination. Nurture the social capital to leverage for self-determination. Go with humility so you can pause and ask, what is it that you want? How can we support? A transformed crisis response. How does it look? Not stalled, but adapted partners. Not undermined, but enhanced governments. Not undervalued, but strengthened civil society. Not weakened, but empowered communities. Power and resources shifted to affected people over the gatekeepers and power brokers. In this changing landscape of aid and development, there is visibility for ordinary people. In this changing landscape of aid and development, there is visibility for ordinary people, grassroots movements, community volunteers, businesses, and diasporas beyond humanitarian giants. Collaboration between allies and friends, hubs and networks formed and sustained. Towers crumbled, making space for huts. Bridges are built, connecting divided worlds like humanitarianism, peace, and development, or like disaster and tourism, not disaster capitalism. A pluralistic society is on the rise, where my humanity, yours, and theirs coexist with whispers of our ancestors and the wisdom of our elders, collective memories of survival and resilience, local knowledge and lived experiences carried by generations for generations to come. A pluralistic humanitarian society is on the rise. Dear courageous change makers and fearless leaders, let's stand together on the grounds of respect, fertilized with trust, care, and compassion, where relationships grow and sustain for long, to learn from and to learn with, to support and respond affected communities amidst the crisis of our time. Let the passion lead, the money shall follow. Let the vision guide, the cooperation shall fall. Let us be the change, the ivory tower shall fall. Let us be the change, the ivory tower shall fall. Thank you. Nandri.
Kind of not fair to ask anybody to follow that.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Does anybody want to? Any other budding poets? Maybe before inviting Matt up for Matt's reflections, anybody from the audience, any participants want to add to what we've heard over the last 45 minutes or so? Any reflections? Yeah, please.
Yeah, hi, my name's Chelsea. I'm sort of newer. I'm newer to the humanitarian sort of sector, and yeah, it's been really insightful the last few days. What I have really picked up though is that there, a lot of the sessions are focused on some of the parts that aren't working, and those reflections, and I just wondered, as humanitarian workers, does that make us less likely to embrace innovation and change, and to be brave and to be creative and do things differently because we're afraid of the scrutiny? Because I sort of have picked up quite a bit of that over the last couple of days. So I was just interested to hear from anyone about that, really.
Thank you. Anybody want to have a crack? I have some thoughts. Only one or two. I think by nature, and this is a big generalization, so forgive me, but I think a lot of people working in crises, humanitarians, responders, communities, you have to have a level of critical reflection constantly. So to Saoirse's point, when we were developing the concept for this conference, we wanted it to be quite positive and forward-facing. And I think almost by nature, it's very hard to get anything positive out of people working in in really difficult circumstances day in, day out. I don't think it stopped the sector or the sectors, perhaps, from trying different things. Sometimes we get stuck on trying different technologies instead of different ways of connecting. But I think it's moving in the right direction. I think that there is hope, for want of a better term. Puji.
To the young ones, welcome to this confusing world. But I would say, though, I've gone through places, I've seen terrible things, I've done terrible things. But I have also encountered very courageous people who survived the most difficult part of their life. And I've seen people who, myself included, to see this work truly rewarding, that we change people's life at a time when it really mattered to them. Surely it is not easy. There's not been party all the time. There's some party, but not all the time, I'm saying. I believe, and I speak for many of us, we're living in the maybe very pericoloso. We're really treading the thin line of right or wrong. But if we don't walk it, who else? We cannot stay in a safe place all the time, because there are many others who don't live in safe places. And sometimes we hold the semblance of the key to the solution. Sometimes it goes with a lot of doubts. That's why we're sitting here. We seek for affirmation. We check our assumptions. That's why it doesn't look right, because we have collective doubts about this. If it's easy, I would have not been here. I would have been next building with the corporates. But I chose to be here. This is not lifestyle. This is life choice. Welcome.
Can I say something positive?
Yeah, please.
I want to say something positive. I think the last few years we've looked at some fantastic examples of humanitarian work. I'm thinking of Tropical Cyclone Pam, which went through Vanuatu a few years back, was it 2014, 15? You know, it's Category 5, it devastated most of the country. But the government responded. You know, the NDMO, they responded beforehand. People warned people, and they only lost 11 people out of that. You know, and the effort which came in, there was lots of good things which came out of it. And the recent volcanic eruption in Tonga, you know, affected by COVID, cut the communication lines. From what I understand in Tonga, you know, that the country there, you know, they had their plans out with the local, you know, civil society. No woofties, no foreigners came in, you know, for a while. And so there have been, you know, some good efforts. So I don't want us to get too down in the mouth about this. I think there have been some great examples of humanitarian assistance. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Joseph?
6 weeks ago, I was in Jordan, and I was seeing a few people who were displaced from Syria and Iraq. And one of the gentlemen said to me, we don't need the food, we don't need the vouchers, we don't need the contribution that the world is bringing. We need the future. And it made me think around how much we are, as an INGOs, as a system, as humanitarians, trying to work out within the systems or are innovative outside of the system, which answers some of your concerns. I think it depends on the agency you will be choosing to work with. There is some conservatives within some of the agencies, I believe. My reflections on working within the political system and how can they be, for the safety reasons, sometimes innovation doesn't work. And part of also reflections I'd like to really see is humanitarian aid is connected to building future of displaced people through giving them skills and resources instead of food and bread.
Thanks, Joseph. One of the things we were trying to do in the conference, and one of the steers to the presenters and speakers was to try and give those positive examples of where things are happening. And so there's the phrase that the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. I'd certainly take the point, and it's something that I think we could try and do more of. Dev, and then Alina.
Yeah, one of the things that I took away from the last few days was just thinking about last year, my whole life became Poland and Ukraine, and actually being able to step away and listen to so many of our colleagues from around the world, from all of the online courses that we've had, to think about our diaspora, to think about the different groups of people we've had, to look at the question of, Ukraine, Poland was the first time we didn't have those big refugee camps really coming out like we had in so many other responses. Sorry, my voice is so loud already. But I think, for me, it's been wonderful to hear so many different examples about what people are trying, and then to have those conversations and to hear conversations coming back at, it was probably 6-7 years ago that we were talking about with the travel industry, and now to see the travel industry here and talking to us is amazing. And it makes me so excited. And so I think we are starting to move those changes that we've maybe pushed for, advocated for, and now to have them happen is just fantastic. So thank you to everybody who's worked on them online and presented and put those papers as well, because it's been a really rich knowledge. And for somebody coming out to the field, it just feels really good. And I hope people who are online really do go back and listen to those to really kind of get that hope that we were talking about that needs to be there.
Thanks, Deb. Alina.
Just a short comment. Thank you very much for the question for the newcomer, and welcome to the confusing industry indeed. But I think it is important for us to remain critical. My husband, my husband that you met just actually asked me one time, why are you so critical about your own sector? Why are you so critical about each other? Why you criticize yourself, right? But I think it is good to be critical, and this is actually that we have to be critical. So you have another C, right? Creative, critical. You use the 4 M's for this year's conference. Then you just have to invent another 2 C's. Apart from critical and creative and critical, find another to see for your next theme of the conference.
Creative, critical, complex, crises. Confusing. We got 5 C's. We need a 6th. Corporate. Thank you. Please.
Could we add one more? Courageous as well. So I just want to build on the point that you earlier made. I'm actually not from the sector. My name is Samantha. I'm from Think Place. We are strategic designers. So the past 3 days has been pretty eye-opening for me, and I believe my colleagues who are watching online, it's probably really eye-opening for all of us. We work with partners in the humanitarian sector, and this conference, I think, pretty much we probably learned a lot more of the humanitarian sector than what we have previously. I think there's a lot of value in having people outside the sector coming in to hear a little bit about what the sector is doing, and also maybe like thinking about ways of how we could work together towards better futures. So the motto for Think Place is let's design a better future for all. And hopefully me and my colleagues could take this back and think about how we could also contribute and work alongside the humanitarian sector. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass to Matt now for some very complex summary remarks.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. I feel this is a bit of a dud gig. I'm not only standing between a group of humanitarians and drinks, but I'm following a poet. So in all of content delivery and duration, I'm probably destined to disappoint you. So apologies in advance. But it's lovely to be here. It's lovely to see you all. Matt Tinkler's my name. I'm the CEO at Save the Children Australia, but I'm also the chair of the Centre Executive Committee for the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership. So it's a real privilege to be able to see you in the room where it happens, as Lynn-Manuel Miranda would say, but also everyone online in the virtual room. And as some of you have reflected, I think there's a real challenge and opportunity for us to take the conversation from this physical and virtual room and actualize that in the world around us. It's interesting listening to some of the reflections here about guilt, and I think as a CEO and a leader in one of the world's biggest humanitarian actors, we all struggle to reconcile this tension between, on the one hand, trying to make our organisation more effective and efficient in trying to meet the extraordinary humanitarian needs, the unmet needs that exist in the world around us, but simultaneously trying to disrupt that very business model, because we know it's a business model that's not true to the values of international development, of child rights from our perspective, and humanitarianism. So it's a really difficult tension for us to walk, but one of the ways that Save the Children is trying to reconcile those tensions is through the very things like the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership and this discussion and dialogue that we've all been having. I've been involved in the executive committee since the formal inception of the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership, and I'm really proud of the work that Josh and the team, Mariana, it's great to see you and the twins there as well, the work that the CHL is doing. And at its core, this is really an industry partnership between Save the Children and Deakin University, so one of Australia's leading tertiary institutions and one of Australia's leading humanitarian institutions in Save the Children. And we think it's a unique partnership and a very special one because it allows us to prompt these conversations, these difficult conversations. And you've heard that the CHL envisions a humanitarian system that embraces the agency of affected people and promotes distributed power, social justice and equity. And its mission is really to lead and influence change within that system through critical analysis, through debate, education, research and meaningful contributions to quality and practice. And I think this conference is an example of that theory of change in practice, where we are living that theory of change and showing that this kind of industry partnership between a university and a humanitarian organisation can work to meet those aims. So I think this has been a unique conversation, and there's been over 110 speakers from 75 different organisations over 3 days. And as a digital first event, we've also had the privilege to be able to engage over 350 delegates from more than 85 countries. So thank you, everyone, online and here, for being part of that. I think it's really fascinating to delve into this debate. As a CEO, I often get very busy with the running of a business that comes with being a leader in a big and complex organisation. But to step out and consider some of the macro and micro of the humanitarian system and how we operate within it and how we need to evolve to be more fit for purpose is really inspiring, I think. So from Themrose Khan, who challenged us on day one to re-engineer an alternative ecosystem for global development. And I really like the discussion around the absence of a real distinction between international, local actors and us all being part of civil society, and not to forget the real politic that exists today between nations and regions and countries and civil society actors. So I think some fantastic food for thought. And of course, Adelina, and your challenge around the humanitarian ecosystem and ecosystem, I think, is a fantastic way of thinking about how and capturing that transformation that needs to occur. But of course, we've had this myriad of insightful and strategic conversations on things like the experience of refugees within the system, following the money trail, the legal principles governing our humanitarian interventions, the transformative power of cash and voucher assistance in this system, the role of diaspora, volunteers, the tourism sector. And I was talking with Gopi about our experience here in the Pacific during COVID, where economies like Fiji are more than 50% reliant on tourism. Vanuatu. When Cyclone Harold hit Vanuatu, the borders were shut, the tourism industry was gone. We recruited a significant workforce from the tourism industry, people who are skilled in procurement, financial management, people management, supply chain. And one of our deputy country directors is actually someone we poached from a hotel and remains. So I think there is huge potential in this interface between industries as well. And we've heard speakers from around the world share their experience and insight into responses in wars, disasters, conflict and displacement. And all of them have touched on the diversity and capacity for local humanitarian leaders, the strength of different groups in society, and the challenge to the existing colonial foundation of the system we work in. But importantly, I think how leadership's been expressed to deal with those complexities, and it is dealing with them. I'm very optimistic about the future. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can reconcile those tensions. The people in this room give me confidence that we can solve some of these challenges. And I have the privilege of being able to travel around the world to see some of our humanitarian leaders in action. You know, last year I was in the Horn of Africa, in Syria, in Solomon Islands, in Fiji, in Papua New Guinea. In all of these places, I'm inspired by the capacity of civil society leaders, of staff in organisations like Save the Children and others. So I'm optimistic about the future. This week, though, I sat in our Global Management Committee for Save the Children. That's my nighttime job as well as my daytime job. And we had a presentation on the trends in humanitarian funding. And for 2022, I think the humanitarian target was $52 billion. We reached about 40 billion of that. Of the 40 billion, UN agencies received more than 67%. And 3 UN agencies alone, WFP, UNICEF and UNHCR, received 54%. So 3 agencies, 54% of $40 billion of global humanitarian funding went to 3 UN agencies. NGOs received 16%. Local and national actors, tiny percentage. So somewhere less than 5%. In 2021, it was 1.2%. So according to development initiatives. So despite the commitments under the Grand Bargain, despite our own rhetoric and our desire to transform the system and to devolve power to local organisations, I think in the last few years, the humanitarian sector has probably seen an unprecedented concentration of power into UN agencies, unfortunately. So while these conversations are fantastic and it gives me a lot of cause for hope, clearly there's a lot of work to do as well. So the conversation can't end here. So I really encourage you to continue the conversation in your organisations, in the forums, in the teams you participate in. I know that the CHL will continue the work it does, including many of the speakers you've heard from today. So I encourage you to get behind them, to reach out to Josh and the team if you can over the coming weeks or months. If you'd like to get involved, contribute your own ideas, resources, solutions, examples, we'd really love to hear them. And we'd love to see you in a couple of years' time for the next version of this conference as well. And we'll try and synthesize all of those ideas and suggestions for title and substance and everything else. But for those of you here in Melbourne, please stay around. We've got some drinks and nibbles on. Enjoy the chance to network and relax a little bit among these fantastic colleagues. But from all of us involved in the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership, a huge thank you to Josh in particular and the team who pulled this together. It is a significant amount of work and time and effort that goes into it, but we're really grateful for them and grateful for you and your participation. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you to everyone. Thanks to colleagues online for staying with us. I will be relatively short before passing over to Associate Professor Megan Kelly to open the networking drinks, which I'm sure you're all keen to continue with. Does anybody know what spelunking is? Yeah. There was a recent report by a group in Geneva around spelunking the humanitarian system. It's a really interesting report, and I think in some ways what we've been doing over the last 3 days is that, diving into the recesses and the deep dark holes of the global disaster response system and trying to shine a light on different aspects to that so that we can address it, so that we can see it and then do something about it. So equally to Matt's points, I certainly encourage us all to continue doing that. There's a lot of energy over the last 3 days and especially today, so thank you all for that. I think it's amazing and something that we want to continue working on. So if you do want to stay involved in trying to re-engineer some form of global disaster response systems, please get in touch. If you've got spare money in your pocket, throw it at me. I will catch it. And keep those ideas coming. We are going to try and work with some key actors, some amazing minds, and some inspiring leaders that we've heard from and seen the last 3 days. We're going to try and keep doing that with a small group of people to put forward provocations in a more structured, systemic, collaborative way across the globe. So would invite you to be a part of that in any way, shape or form. And thank you once again. Before passing to Megan or inviting Megan to come up, some more words of thanks. Thanks to Deakin Events. They've made this all possible. So round of applause, please. Thank you to Oxford HR, who helped support the conference, that you would have heard from colleagues from Oxford HR last night and today. So thank you. Thanks to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Australian Government. They've also supported the conference. Not sure where Anna is, but thanks to the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership's amazing staff, research affiliates and associates. All of this has been possible because of the brains and effort and insights of colleagues that we work with. I won't name names other than Associate Professor Mary Anna McGlasson, who's back at the room with Zane and Jude, who's the Substantive Director for the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership. So wave to the three of them over there. And thank you to you all. It really is an honour and a privilege to have so many amazing people engage over the last 2 days and today here in person and online. So thank you once again. Over to you, Megan.
So, new mindset, right? Conference done. We now welcome you to the networking function of the 2023 Humanitarian Leadership Conference. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders and their ancestors for allowing us to gather on their land, acknowledging their continuing connection to the beautiful country that we're in, and thank them for their care and custodianship over many thousands of years. I extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, online perhaps also, and acknowledge the education that they also provide, which has a rich, long historical connection to this continent. So it's my pleasure, and thank you very much, Josh, for inviting me to do it, to open the networking function tonight and welcome you all to Deakin Downtown. You've been here for a little while, but you're here now for the networking function. I'd like to very much acknowledge the partnership Deakin has with Save the Children, and we value that partnership greatly. And thank Save the Children for their ongoing commitment to the Centre of Humanitarian Leadership. And as Josh has also suggested before, actually thank our major sponsors for the conference, the Australian Government, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Oxford HR. I also welcome the staff of these two organisations who've joined us here in Melbourne and acknowledge the generous support they've had for the Humanitarian Leadership Centre all along. I'd like to congratulate the Centre on hosting a very ambitious week. The Humanitarian Leadership Conference has grown, as you probably imagine, from one-day event in Melbourne in 2019 to a 3-day hybrid event, attracting hundreds of delegates from around the world. So congratulations to the team on that amazing success. And on behalf of the Centre, I'd like to also thank all of the speakers, volunteers, delegates in the room today, and some of you travelled from overseas and long distances to be with us. A special welcome and thank you to the keynote speaker, Adelina Kamal, who's travelled from Indonesia to participate. And thank you to Josh. I think he deserves a very big round of applause. Josh Hallwright has taken on a very big role as the acting director. And I've come into an acting position myself, so I appreciate the challenges that presents. And thank you to the Centre under Josh's leadership for their ongoing hard work as well. So after the events of the past 3 years, it's a great opportunity now to come together, as we have for this conference, and network with your colleagues and peers. So please enjoy this time together and continue the conversations that I know you have started over the past few days. Strengthen your connections and take the energy that you'll get from that in just having that time to now have a conversation together. So I welcome you to join us outside for drinks for the networking. Thank you.